What is up, down and sideways, beautiful people of this earth? Welcome to League on Lock and the second countdown to the official start of MSI. The play-ins are behind us, which means we get to wait a few more days and count down to the main group stage with the top 6 teams, and gives us a bit of time to finally do our top 20 player rankings, or the 20 best players at this year's installment of the midseason invitational. And you know, it's a little bit late, but we wanted to wait until those 6 teams were actually figured out, who we knew for sure 100% were going to be in the group stage, because you know there was a teeny tiny chance that either Liquid or Flash Wolves didn't actually make it. But of course they did. They are there for the top 6. So we're going to go 20-1. The best players, I mean, the criteria you're looking at is just leading up. We're looking at 2019. Their performance so far in 2019 leading up to this event, which is, and including play-ins for some of these guys. So obviously, we're not looking career, what they did 3 years ago, maybe kind of talking about just how they've performed internationally throughout their careers. But mostly, we're looking at so far in 2019 with a bit of international performances. Let's get to the list. Enough of me rambling. We're going 20 to 16. We're going to break this up in groups of 5. And even though the Buffalo, they got in to the main stage, there was some struggles that they had to get there, but nonetheless, we still have Zeros in there in the top 20, just barely getting in there. I still think he's got the highest ceiling of anyone on the Buffalo, and well, he does die a lot, and unnecessarily so. He's incredibly aggressive regardless of the matchup, and yes, I think he will be heavily punished for it here in the main group stage. He still comes in at number 20. Xmithy, one of the most consistent, not one of, the most consistent jungler in North America over the past several years now. He's actually performed at an international level. Excited to see him back on the stage. He was not one of the issues, or not one of the main issues for Liquid back in 2018 MSI. Number 18, we got Betty from Flash Wolves. One of the, I mean, he's now the veteran of this Flash Wolves squad with Karsa, Sword Art, and Maple all gone. Him and Hanabi are the only 2 returning from last year's run at MSI. He was still dominant in the LMS this spring season, even though Flash Wolves had a rough regular season, especially the closing end to it. They lost 5 or 6 games in a row heading into playoffs, but he turned it up another notch in the playoffs. He completely dominated Gadget and Santis in the bottom lane for Vega, as expected. I mean, we've seen Betty perform at a world-class level. This is where we kind of include what he did last year at MSI, and he was a top 3 AD carry at that entire event in what was an absolutely stacked AD carry field with people like Uzi, Prey, and Doublelift. He was right up there with the very best of them, and he's going to need to perform at that level again if Flash Wolves are going to be able to get out of groups here in 2019. But Betty is now the leader of Flash Wolves, and he's still young, still relatively young in his career, but he has shown he can be that world-class ADC. And speaking of ADCs, or awesome dude carries, which is exactly what Perks is for G2 in that lineup, and it's hard to tell what he's going to actually play. I expect if he's sticking to marksman, I think that he will be outclassed by some of these other guys. But you have Perks and Jankos both following up in that 17 and 16 spot. Jankos, because he was a front runner for MVP for the first 5 or 6 weeks, is why we have him 1 spot ahead of Perks. And I know the flexibility that Perks brings to a pick ban, maybe you want to put him higher, but he dies a lot. He died with no jungler support from either squad, and that's going to maybe be an issue here at MSI, but he's still in the top 20. Let's move on to the next 5, 15 to 11, and this is where you got a lot more of the Liquid boys showing up. In fact, only 2 teams represented on this entire list. Obviously, you've got the MVP of the North American LCS, Core JJ, there in at number 11. And then the carry threats of Doublelift and Jensen for Liquid. And I think if you look at their series versus PVB, I think Jensen was actually one of the best performers alongside Impact, really. It was the solo lanes that stepped up in a big way for Liquid. We know Jensen had the ridiculous KDA in the LCS. He actually finished with a higher KDA than Chovy, the man who had 100 KDA at one point during the regular season. So we had a fantastic split with Liquid. He showed up in the playoffs when they needed it most. That Game 5 against TSM, he put on a fantastic performance on the LeBlanc. He's been a consistent carry threat, and this is the time to show up for him. This is where he's supposed to be better than Pobelter when it comes to the international stage. Doublelift did his job, carried him to his first ever LCS title. Now it's time for the Dane in the mid lane, for Liquid to step up on the international stage, which he's done for, so many years. At Worlds, we've always seen him go toe-to-toe with some of the world's best, except for, when he, of course, got clapped by Faker. But he's going to have a chance at Redemption Part 3, this time on a different roster around them. Obviously, Doublelift and Jensen are some of the most important players for this Liquid squad, and we talked about Core JJ coming in at number 11. He's not the highest rated support coming into this tournament, but we know he is world class. He has been on Liquid, and obviously what he did on Samsung, so deserving so of being there. And then the 12 and 13, we've got the bottom lane for IG. We have Baolon one spot ahead of Jackie Love. I think him and Core JJ, and you'll see as this list continues, the top 3 supports at this event, I think, are super close, and you can make an argument for moving pretty much all 3 of them around, which is why we have them so close in our rankings. But Baolon one spot just barely below Core JJ, and I think he is a spot ahead of Jackie Love just because he's so important for IG. We know every team needs the strategic inters that, someone like Hillisang calls it on Fnatic. And Baolon's the man who's not afraid to die for his squad. He's always there to engage. He's always there to keep Jackie Love safe and happy in that laning phase. And they've actually been a very solid bot lane throughout the LPL here in the spring split. And Jackie Love, for what he's accomplished already in his young career with an LPL title, a world championship now. This guy's not even 19 yet, and he's already performed so much. He's kind of been, people have looked at the weak point because he's had some questionable performances on Invictus, but in 2019, that has not been the case. Even in spring and summer for 2018, you definitely saw that, but 2019, it's been a new era for Jackie Love. He's been very consistent. He's had more carry duties than we were accustomed to seeing last year with Invictus, which, you're going to get that when you have Rookie and the Shy on your roster. But overall, Jackie Love's had a fantastic split, and I'm excited to see him against some other world-class AD carries, and we do have him one spot ahead of Doublelift there. I think, again, it's close, but you've got to give the edge to Jackie Love. He's looked very solid, and the competition he's been going against in the LPL, we know that they're known for world-class AD carries, and Jackie Love has been going toe-to-toe with the very best of them. No offense to the rest of the North American ADCs, but Jackie Love's competition is a little bit stiffer, and that's why he has that one edge over Doublelift on our rankings. And just like that, only the top 10 remains. And coming up after the break, we go through those top 10, and that was just the beginning of Invictus and some SKT members. Yes, there's a lot of them in the top 10. Welcome back, you beautiful individuals, to League Unlock. We're counting down the top 20 players at MSI 2019, and we have cracked the top 10, which means if you don't like Invictus Gaming or SK Telecom, you should probably stop watching because they make up the majority of the top 10, and it's hard to argue against that being the case. I talked about earlier how Baolon, Core JJ, and the other support who shall remain nameless are very close in these rankings, while that other support is, of course, Mata on SKT, and he's coming in at number 10 on these rankings. And it's really hard to differentiate these 3 because obviously someone like Core JJ is probably the most important to his squad, so maybe he should go higher. And Mata, obviously, it feels like you're cheating a little bit by including, it's hard to not include his whole career, even though I know I specifically said this is just from 2019. But Mata has still had a very solid run with SKT. Not the absolute peak of his career, but you feel like just the potential that he has coming into this, you still have to put him ahead of Core JJ and Baolon. But those three are so incredibly close, you could still be making an argument anyway. But it's actually the first time we're seeing Mata at MSI in a while since he was on RNG, so that is very exciting. But there's a lot of good supports coming into this event, which makes the entire Mickey X and Promise Q mystery even more exciting. And by the way, Mickey would be on our top 20 if I was fully confident that he would be playing in the majority of these games. It just didn't feel right to put him on the list when the amount of games he's actually going to play is still so much up in the air. Number 9, we got our third IG member in Ning, and we know he can be incredibly aggressive, sometimes too aggressive, but he was still one of the best junglers in the LPL throughout the majority of the spring split. Him and Rookie still have their incredible synergy that we saw from them throughout 2018. Still expect him to put on a very solid show for this year's MSI, and I'm excited to see him as well. We got some G2 members that are way high up. Number 8 is Wonder, and he's been, I know there's a lot of debate between who's actually better. Who's the best solo laner on G2? Is it Wonder or Caps? Well, obviously, based on this list, we have Caps ahead of Wonder, but he had an incredible run. Again, he's been the best top laner in Europe since he came to G2. It's been pretty cut and dry. Yeah, Cabochard had a great split in spring, but Wonder is still, he's the best carry top laner. He can probably be the best tank top laner if he wanted to in Europe. We've seen him dominate on the international stage, but of course the one person he couldn't dominate is at this event in the Shy on IG, but very excited to see a lot of the top lane matchups. I've said a few times, last year it was all about the AD carries at MSI. This year it is all about the solo laners, and Wonder will definitely have some stiff competition, but he's shown that Europe is just too easy for this guy. He's often forgotten about when Perks and Caps are stealing the headlines with their crazy picks, but he is an absolute force in the top lane, whether Jankos is giving him attention or not. Excited for Wonder, and right above him, we got to go with Khan. I know I just hyped up Wonder. He had a great split. Khan, last year coming into this event, he was right up there, probably, I can't remember what our list was, but he might have been number 1. There was a lot of hype. We expected him to completely dust everybody at the event. Obviously, he didn't live up to that hype. He's in at number 7 this year, and he has been absolutely incredible on SKT. He looks much more like Longzhu Khan as opposed to Kingzone, as he did towards the end of his time on that squad. He's fit in perfectly on SKT. He's done all that they needed. Some of these games, he's finished with some hilarious score lines of 1-0-1 or something on the Fiora, where he's just not involved in these team fights, but applies such a ridiculous amount of pressure around the map and on the opposing team. So he's really thrived in this meta. He's been able to play a lot of these, typically difficult picks. We've seen so many top laners struggle on something like Akali, and he has performed well on it. He's been great on the Hecarim, and obviously, he was playing Jace top way before all these other kids. He did it when he was cool. He's the original hipster Jace top laner. We're even seeing him play Riven a whole lot more, even though he did die 1v1 to Sword in that Riven Aatrox matchup. But aside from that, he definitely dominated that top side of the map against Griffin and was one of the main win conditions for them to play through against that Griffin squad. So Khan looking for some redemption at this year's MSI. And at number 6, we got to talk about the MVP of Europe, the MVP of the LEC, Mr. Back-to-Back with 2 different squads. Of course, it's Caps. And I know a lot of people talk about with Caps, I think Doublelift said it in an interview recently. He said, with Caps, you're either getting him 0-10 or he's 10-0. There's no in between. Obviously, that's a big hyperbole, but he is basically either hard carrying or borderline inting, but when you reach the highest of highs with Caps, he is the best player in the entire Western scene, NA or EU. It doesn't matter. He is the very best, and that's why he's coming in here with back-to-back MVPs. I think the first half of the split, a lot of the wins that G2 were getting were hard-carrying performances from Caps. Yes, much like the rest of G2, hit a bit of a slump towards the end of the split, but we've already seen what Caps is capable of on the international level. Maybe he didn't perform quite to what we were expecting at Worlds last year, but at MSI, he was far and away the brightest shining star for that Fnatic roster. There's no reason to think it won't be the same case here on this G2 squad. And what's so incredible about him is, of course, his ridiculous champion pool. We talk about the flexibility that Perks gives on this G2 roster, but it's not just him. It's the entire squad. I wonder can play pretty much anything in the top lane, and Caps can play not mid lane champions. He plays Pyke, he plays Vayne, it doesn't matter. So the champion pool and just how high a level he can play these random champions is why Caps is in at number 6, just outside of that top 5. But coming up after the break, we have that top 5, and you'll see why Caps was just on the outside looking in, because these are the scariest players on the planet to play against. Hello friends, and welcome back to League Unlock as we wrap up the countdown of the top 20 players at this year's mid-season invitational. We are on to the top 5. We've already gone through a few Invictus and SKT players, but guess what? The top 5 is entirely made up of the 2 favorites for this event. And usually, anytime you come into one of these international events, it's a pretty safe bet to assume that the greatest player in the history of League of Legends, Faker, is going to be in the top 2 at very worst. But coming into this event, remember, we're accounting for mostly 2019 performances, and that is why the unkillable Demon King is in at number 5. No, he has not been the most consistent, the most important, or the best player on SKT in 2019 spring. Yes, he's still one of the greatest players on the planet. That's why he's in again at number 5, but there's been other members of SKT that have had better splits, and that's why they're ahead of him. But Faker is in at number 5. He's still in the top 5. He still had a very solid split, especially the second half. He really turned it on when he started playing, you know, less Urgot and Lissandra, and actually got to play some of these more carry champions that we've seen the man play for the majority of his career. But no, he's not the top-ranked mid laner even coming into this event. But really the only guy you could probably safely put ahead of him is, of course, someone like Rookie, which is why we had him slotted in there at number 3. But Faker, as long as he's playing his staple picks in a LeBlanc, Azir, or Ryze, you know he will be an absolute force at this event. I'm just excited to have him and SKT back on the international stage, but I'm also excited to see him go up against Rookie, the defending world champion, the guy who, I mean, they met way back in 2014, KT versus SKT, and Rookie actually performed pretty darn well against Faker, but then, of course, he ran away to the LPL. Not ran away, and played on IG, where he got a bunch of MVPs before they were actually good. But even Rookie had a bit of a... He didn't have as nearly a dominant spring split as we saw. Guys like Knight and DoinB definitely had better splits than him, you could say, throughout the majority of the LPL. But when playoffs came, even towards the end of the regular season, it was the same Rookie that we're accustomed to seeing. And overall, he's been more dominant than Faker this split, which is why we have him that 1 spot ahead, or 2 spots ahead of Faker. Then you got... SKT actually has a jungler. No more Agent 612 in blank. It's Clid. And I think people... I don't know why people are, I don't want to say underrating, but almost forgetting what Clid did for the entire season. He was as important to SKT as Tarzan was for Griffin, and I think that's almost a similar weakness that SKT and Griffin have, is the entire early game runs through their jungler. So when Tarzan doesn't have perfect pathing, when his ganks don't work out, Griffin looks like a totally different team. And the same can be said for SKT, although it is to a much lesser level. They're still a world-class team. If Clid doesn't perform to an absolutely insane level, but it was rare that he didn't perform at that level. He instantly gelled with this squad. He had some of the most ridiculous Baron steals that we've seen in a couple of years throughout the entirety of the split. His Lee Sin, absolutely disgusting. Permaban that if you're watching at MSI. I mean, he can play tanks. He can play whatever the team needs, but definitely when he is on these aggressive early game champions. But I mean, you see how aggressive he is even on the J4. He'll be going deep into some invades on that Jarvan pick. And Clid was so incredibly important for SKT, so incredibly consistent, even when they had, I hesitate to even call it a slump, but when they were still figuring things out with this roster early on, it was still Clid who was the most consistent man for this squad, and that's why he's in at number 4 and is the highest rated jungler, the man to watch in any of these jungle matchups. Let's go to the top 2 because rookie typically always going to be there in the top 2. We just hyped up Clid, but he was not the best performing player on SKT this split. Of course, it's Teddy. Give this man a team, and you can see what he can do. He can completely dominate, be the best AD carry in the LCK, and maybe be vying for that title of best ADC in the world right now. I mean, you flash back to his Jin Air times, and he put on so many carry performances, and basically any win Jin Air was getting was because of him. Well, now he doesn't have nearly that much pressure to carry, so I swear it's a breeze for him that he has so many better laners and other guys who can take over games. When his number is called, though, he definitely delivers, and there were a lot of fights this split where SKT played in a lot of very back and forth fights with lots of people dying, and it would time and time again be Teddy who's still alive at the end of these fights, cleaning them up, and he's just shown that he can be the featured carry on an absolutely star-studded roster. He's obviously the youngest guy on this squad, probably the least experienced, close there with Clid, but he is an absolute man on a mission, and he will be one of the main guys to check out here at MSI. He was the most dominant guy on SKT, which is why he's in at number 2, but not quite that top spot because that honor has to go to the Shy on IG. I mean, both of these guys, Teddy and the Shy, are who I'm most excited to watch at this event. But for the Shy, I mean, I know he split some time with Duke, but we know this guy didn't drop a beat from what we saw at Worlds. You're going to need to send more than 2 people to ever gank him unless he's at 50 health and the other 2 guys are at basically full health, because this guy can turn around pretty much any gank. The meta continues to completely be in his wheelhouse, and I know a lot of people, we even talked about maybe switching towards more of a tank meta for this year's midseason invitational, but didn't seem to be the case in the play-in stage, which means we get to see plenty more of this out of the Shy. Complete outplays, completely destroying people, and if someone like Zeros is playing incredibly aggressive and just constantly battling and skirmishing back and forth in the top lane against someone like the Shy, good luck, my man, because you're going to get absolutely bodied as he did to the rest of the entire LPL squads throughout the spring split. The Shy comes in at number 1. He's ahead of his buddy Rookie, ahead of Teddy on SKT. Obviously, Invictus and SK Telecom are going to be the big favorites here, but I wouldn't be surprised if G2 or Flash Wolves, even Liquid, can take a game out of these guys, especially G2 with their insane pick and ban. MSI is just around the corner. That's all the time today for League Unlocked. My name's Eric. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next time.